I am Plant on the Line in Vancouver at thecommentary.ca. We tend to think that with so much technology around us, computers, cell phones, and various devices and social media, that the world is getting better. We're getting closer, and our lives are getting simpler. Unfortunately, we know that's not the case, and a great book looks at how our brains are changing and how our behavior is seriously affected. The book is called iMinds, How Cell Phones, Computers, Gaming, and Social Media Are Changing Our Brains, Our Behavior, and the Evolution of Our Species. Its author, Dr. Mari Swingle, joins me now, and I'll get her to tell us about her research and just how our well-being could seriously be harmed. Mari Swingle is a neurotherapist and behavioral specialist whose Swingle Clinic here in Vancouver is renowned around the world. She has degrees in clinical psychology, language education, and visual arts. She's won awards for her postdoctoral work on the effects of eye technology on brain function. The websites for more are imindsbook.com and drmariswingle.com. The book is published by New Society Publishers. Please welcome to the Plant Online program, Mari Swingle. Dr. Swingle, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I understand this is the second edition of the book?
Not second edition. It's a relaunching of it.
I see.
Different publisher.
I see. And this might be a silly question, but what have you noticed in terms of because I guess it was originally published about a year or so ago, have there been any differences in terms of how we are with technology? I mean, I guess every year there's always a new device, a new thing, a new app or whatever, that it seems to be getting worse.
Absolutely. When I present, I say we're chasing a moving target. I would say, first presentations I did on this were around 5 years ago, and there's not one slide that's the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so we tend to think, a lot of us, that technology is good, that it's the panacea for everything that ails us. But we are, I've noticed, really blind and ignorant to its effects. Why is that, do you think?
Well, there are different buy-in factors. What I'm finding is views are absolutely polarized, and what I term as vested interest. So essentially, the folks that are trying to sell us products, including the technologies, are only promoting the positive. And then what I refer to as the zealots are only promoting the negative. So it really makes it hard for individuals to navigate. One of the things I do point out in my book is all of us, whether individuals or media, they're like, we take what we want from what we read. And there are a couple of studies that some media essentially tout as extremely positive. They look at the data and they find positive results. And when I look at the fine print of the data, I actually find it negative. So again, it's really, really hard for parents and lay people to navigate this. So
So as a doctor, as someone who treats people with certain conditions and the sort, how has your job changed in the last few years? I mean, what sort of patients see you, and what are they coming in for, say, treatment?
Dramatically. I'd say the ailments that people, the titles of the ailments or the designations, diagnosis are not changing, but what is magnifying them is. So one of the things that my research pointed out in terms of correlations and other people's as well is there's a definite alliance with overuse of technology and too early introduction of technology with the magnification, if not causality, of depression, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorders, and learning disabilities.
And so if you're in the throes of one of those conditions, I don't know, if, especially if you're young, if you can notice that something's off, if you will, that you're engaging in, say, antisocial behavior, or that you do have a problem. Mm-hmm. So do people in those early ages, and we're seeing, people with devices now, they're born and they've got something in their hand already, through to their teen years. Are they then? I mean, it conditions them to be blind to sort of the effects, and it affects them irreparably, doesn't it?
I would say, one of the things I do say in the book is we're in a live experiment with the young. We don't have the answer yet. But what I'm seeing as a clinician. For older individuals, what we're seeing is there's some kind of an underlying, what we refer to as a psychosocial issue. So a subpathology, so a depression or an anxiety that's just under the surface, and excessive usage will make it worse. But in terms of children, there seems to be more of a causality. To take the example of learning disabilities, a classic one is ADHD. When children are on highly stimulating technology all the time, essentially the technologies train the brain to not inhibit. So what this means is children need higher and higher stimulation in order to pay attention.
And so is that irreparable? Can that be fixed, if you will?
Jury is out for the next generation, but what I'm finding with the majority of children that I work with, if you stop the excessive use of technology and really, really get parents involved in parenting, making overt choices on what's permitted, when, how, and why, then yes, you can do a lot. But as we're seeing this introduced younger and younger, what I call iPad in the cradle, we don't know what that's really doing. And if we talk about development and attachment, getting into broader categories here, 1 to 3, all of our wiring systems in the brain are being set up. And the larger question is this going to be a complete and total override? And if we look at young children who have been abandoned, so if you look at children who have been placed in orphanages where they haven't been touched or tickled or spoken to or sung to, essentially, the brain does not wire, and it's very, very hard to get that back. So if technology is doing the same, so for example, if we place children in cradles with screens in front of them and we don't, same thing, sing to them, tickle them, talk to them, and engage with them, what are we doing to those wiring systems?
And so when you encounter parents who use a device to babysit their child, what's their reaction when you tell them that it's not something that they should do and that they should do otherwise?
Oh, it depends on the parent. I mean, one of the key things I think is very important for any clinician to refrain from judgment. One of the things I talk about in the book is there's an extreme parenting gap. Parents right now, they're overworked, they're overstretched, and they don't have functional support for parenting. So turning to iTech is natural. I say something had to fill the gap. Some parents are very, very naive, and if they fed their child something that's harmful to the child without knowing it, don't push the guilt button. But you want to essentially engage the parent to understand what excessive technology and too early technology and technology without alternate is fundamentally doing and going to continue to do for the child, and essentially get support. One of the things I talk to parents about is saying, most young parents or parents of young children are in an identical situation. Get together and support each other. Whether it's, having the kids go over to one family's home, so single parent or dual parent families can get 3 hours of reprise. Some of the classical things that we used to do years ago, or adaptations in lifestyle, recognizing that the world is going too fast.
So are there guidelines, if you will? Are there ages where introduction to technology is good and perhaps recommended?
The longer I examine this, the more conservative I get. I say absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, before the age of 2. This is when all of the essentially the neural connections are being set up, and it can be dangerous for infants in development. There's mounting evidence that should be age 4, and I've bumped it up to age 6. There is just too much potential for loss, and recognizing that the world is moving forward. We're not talking yet about the positives. There are many, many positives to technologies, but after age 6, essentially, when attachment is wired in, when functional attention is wired in, when the brain is healthy, there's no reason why children can't learn to use the technologies then. A child of 6.5 is not going to be functionally behind in the world of technology, learning at that time.
Well, what have you? Because we've talked about what the deal is with parents and how they're coping. What have you found in terms of the schools themselves and how they say allow, use, or say tolerate this sort of technology within the school hours, if you will?
Yeah. Well, there are multiple levels of answers to that question. The first is exactly the same as what's happening with parents. And this is where, we should all stand on our political soapboxes. If the classrooms are too large, and when children go off task, it's a management issue in a classroom. It's not necessarily an ADHD. It's just with 30 kids, it's a major burden on teachers. And technology has the ability to mesmerize, meaning children will focus more on technology than they will just on a teacher talking. So it's easier for teachers. But just because it's easier doesn't mean it's better. Now, all that said, there are programs that are extremely positive where technology is used very, very well. The one that I'm impressed by, for example, is Community Planet, if people want to look it up. But when technology is inserted into educational programs, it's not necessarily faster or easier. When it's done well, it takes the same amount of curriculum planning on the side of the teacher as well as the developers. So, again, the answers really, really depend. One of the positives we find for basic math, digital platforms are excellent for the teaching of basic math because there are right and wrong answers. Other forms of learning, arguably all of the language arts, you lose creativity, analytical thinking, and other issues by using digital platforms. So again, it depends, and we need more curriculum developers looking at what a child really is learning by digital platforms, and what a child is undoing or not learning when digital platforms are used.
Yeah, so I'm 34 years old, and so I my generation, if you will, got these devices when we were in high school or perhaps a little older.
Yeah.
So it's a generation after that we're talking about. But my generation, previous generations to me, spent a lot of time in front of the television.
Yeah.
And became couch potatoes, if you will.
Yeah.
What's the difference between, say, that and with these things in our hands, the phones and the sort of games and the sort that kids nowadays are engaged in?
Okay. I'm going to have to answer this answer in two sets because, again, the world is moving. So if you go back to the generation before you that you're talking about, we have to talk about what television was in those times. And if we compare that to digital media, television creates inertia. And that's where, of course, we get the terms of couch potato, and, we call the TV the boob tube. Essentially, it mesmerizes us in a different way. The example that I use, which still applies, is, it's late at night, you have to work the next day, you're in front of the TV, and you're not really interested in what's on the television, but for whatever reason, you just can't get up and turn the thing off. That's that zombie state that we used to get into with television in general. So the past, but in terms of digital media or interactive screens, it's the opposite. It revs us up, so and then leaves us there. Television is getting closer and closer to digital media now. It's becoming more interactive.
Yeah.
If you look at different shows, they want you emailing and tweeting in. And if you look at even news feeds, the amount of information that's on a screen, so you have the newscaster talking, and then you have other headlines streaming underneath. If you look at the length of scenes, they're flashing at incredible rates now. Just take a movie from the 1940s, a movie or a show from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and you'll notice the speed of scenes going faster and faster. So essentially, they're starting to meld.
Yeah, and you just look at the popular television shows of the era today and just how complicated they are as opposed to, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You do see a change in that regard. The Internet has made us act differently. And teens, of course, and cyberbullying and what's happening there. But you have noticed, and I read this in the book, about just how we act differently towards one another online versus in person.
It's been coined the inhibition effect, and it was first noticed in cybersex. And essentially what it is we become more brazen. We say things and do things that we never would in face-to-face in real life. We essentially feel protected behind a screen, and we explore aspects of our personality that we be more cautious to in quote-unquote face-to-face real life. Now, again, the catch is things are starting to merge. Cyberbullying in teens is a perfect example that, in past, it all used to be rather anonymous. And people would post things without, face or name attached. And now people kind of go and they test things. And if they get a following, then it's all very, very overt. And you know who's doing it. And, we get pretty negative alter egos coming out.
Yeah. And in terms of, because I've got my phone with me, I've got my laptop, I'm watching all sorts of things on both, and not to mention TV and the sort. For someone who is too connected or too married to their device, if you will, what advice have you got for them?
Cut it down.
And is it, people will come to you and say, Dr. Swingle, that's very hard to do.
Of course it is. And that's where we start to frame it in terms of addiction. Right? When you have a compulsion, just look at classic definitions of addiction, and then look at your usage. Can you do without? Do you choose this over other activities? Do you choose to engage with your devices over people? Is there some sort of a negative repercussion in relationships and work, in your own health? For example, are you suffering from insomnia, anxiety, all of these things? So just look at standard definitions of addiction and look if your usage is starting to cross over. The catch, again, in terms of digital media is, it was brought in as extremely positive, and we've all been in a little bit of a cultural denial about what it's actually doing. And in initial stages, it was fantastic. What I say again in the book is digital media's greatest gift turned into its greatest curse. So this ability to be available and on, there are wonderful aspects to it, but it completely flips when we can't turn it off. So, for example, if you're expected to respond to work emails when you're not at work. France, I believe, has done beautiful things in terms of leading the world, hopefully, that they've made it illegal to respond to work emails after work, which I think is very, very healthy in terms of helping us all establish boundaries. And again, you can see how we're going full circle. If you have parents whether it's a single-parent household or a dual-parent household, if you're always on, you can't leave your work at work, you're not available for your child.
Yeah.
And what is your child going to do when you're on your device? Well, they're going to want a device too. And it just snowballs.
Yeah. Well, what do you, because you have a practice, you write, you have a very busy life. Mm-hmm. What have you found useful for yourself?
Well, the transportability I adore.
Yeah.
The ability to maintain distal relationships is wonderful. All kinds of beautiful things, but just like I'm essentially like everybody else. I'm not trying to pontificate here too much. That I'm very, very aware that I too could cross over, and I've set up some pretty explicit boundaries, which I also do occasionally break. When things get really, really interesting, then sure. But I do have some very tight boundaries in terms of that I will not respond to clinic mails after a certain hour. And the positive for me, as well as my clients and administrative staff, is when we're off, and nobody is waiting on an answer.
Yeah.
So they know that they will be tended to, at 8 or 9 a.m. the next morning. Now, the other hand, I might write them, okay, but I won't send them.
I see. Yeah. What and so, in terms of, I mean, do you find it easy to turn off the phone at a certain hour? I mean, and not just your work now, but just personal life, and we look at our phones all the time because we want to be engaged, with the news or with our friends and the sort. Do you find that easy at night, say?
Easy. I'm not sure I would use that term. I know, like anybody else, if I keep my digital devices on, I'm going to be affected by insomnia. I'm going to be affected by curiosity. One of the, again, I don't mind sharing. I'm in my late 40s. I'm the last generation that knows what the world was pre-iTech, and I make sure that I remember that. And there are times where I definitely, for example, when I travel, I turn my phone off. You will not be able to message me. That said, if you need, I'll still check my email accounts. But my friends and colleagues know this, and this gives me personally great peace of mind. Again, I'm not putting myself in any category different than anybody else. That if I kept my devices on, I would have negative effects as well.
Yeah, I find for me, I turn the phone off. Even if I'm up late, I find that I turn it off at a certain hour.
Perfect.
That way, I don't use it, and I don't need it, if you will.
Yeah.
And so let's end our chat now, Dr. Swingle, with the beginning of your book.
Yes.
There's a piece that's a piece of art that's reproduced at the front.
Yes.
Janus's Ladder, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Why did you use that?
Because of essentially the Roman god Janus, or Janus, depending on who you are and what country you live in. It's the god of doors and passage and transitions. And we are in a really interesting transition. And Janus has two faces, and one looks firmly to the past, while the other bravely looks towards the future. And I think that is exactly the way we should deal with technology. I think we should bravely march towards the future, but also take lessons from the past and ensure that the positives of the past stay with us as we move forward towards the positives of the future.
So it's a great beginning to the book, I thought. And it's a great way, as I said, to end our chat today. You've done a great service with this book, and we'll all learn a lot from reading it. Thanks for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much.
The websites for more, drmariswingle.com and imindsbook.com. Dr. Mari Swingle, its author, joined me on the line from here in Vancouver. I'm Joseph Planta.